the Modi government had a very unique problem facing it when it was designing these labor codes. One, you're summarizing it, sure, but one, you're also factoring in the ease of doing business. Now, the problem in India is, and this any entrepreneur will tell you, that we want to become a manufacturing powerhouse like the Chinese, but the laborers work as if they are Americans and want all American rights. It's a very tricky situation where we are not giving ourselves a reality check. And this also includes the government in a way. You have the aspirations of China, you're looking at the wokeism of America, the work wokeism of America, and in between, you're getting caught in the middle of nowhere. And factoring that uncertainty, factoring that doubt, you come up with these four labor codes that appease to the employer also and the employees also. I think that is the good job. Kushal and I often talk about the boring work the government does, the boring work no one's talking about ever. And guess what? It's true. I was on two television debates on two different national channels, very respected channels, and no one is even discussing the new labor codes, which tells you why these boring things actually move the economy in the long run. Now, within these four codes, Kushal, there is a lot to break down, but let's start with the old laws that have been replaced. Now, the Code on Wages 2019 replaces four laws, Industrial Relations Code replaces three, Code on Social Security, which is where the gig workers will feel they have emerged victorious, is nine laws. And finally, the Health Working Conditions Code is 13 laws. Now, all in all, if you're looking, if someone is saying, okay, this is again too pro labor, we are going back to the socialist era, this has nothing for the employers, they also need to hold their horses. It's not the case. And anyone like the trade unions, which are saying that, oh, this will kill the laborers in India, this is again Adani Ambani ki chal, this is all that same old nonsense, they also need to hold their horses. Now, the first question we need to address is its timing. Why after 5 years? 2020, 2021 was a great time to understand why some of the best policies require the best communication. Because the best policies did not get the best breakdown or communication in the media, and it was a very different time. I mean, believe it or not, 5 years ago, we were a very different country. That is the time when these labor laws codes were introduced, they were passed. Next 5 years, there's a lot of to and fro, a lot of discussion within the unions and the government, a lot of discussion with the state governments and the center, because a lot of these codes they'll also require formulation of rules by the state governments. Now, if you're looking at gig workers, for instance, a lot of those rules have to be formed by the state governments. And what happened in 2020, 21? Some of the state governments, non-BJP state governments, non-NDA state governments, they rejected it outright, which also includes West Bengal, right? In 2025, after Bihar, the BJP also has a wonderful cushion where they know that after Haryana, after Maharashtra, after Delhi, which by the way is a huge industrial city as well, and after Bihar, they have the mandate of the people to do with some difficult reforms. Remember, this has been a crazy of reforms. You have the labor codes notified, you have the GST reforms, you have the income tax cut introduced. So this year has been absolutely crazy on the serious reforms front.
Sorry to
But
come in
that's
here, but these laws
on
are passed in complete
2020.
unison with every single state government.
Yes. All of them are on board because all of
I
them will have
repeat,
to formulate the
every
rules.
single state government was on board in passing these laws. The consultations have been going on for more than 3 years.
Hmm. So there are no major elections also coming up, no major elections until 2027. So even if there is an expected blowback, political blowback, I think the government finds itself in the position to absorb that blowback. Number two, everyone wants to invest in India. We keep hearing about this China plus one strategy. But one thing that deters a lot of investors was the fear of the trade unions. And this you can see everywhere. He's already talking about CPI backed unions announcing a strike. You look at the Foxconn and Wistron plants, even they have underwent this same problem of strikes. So it was very important to retain the trade unions as they are in the Western world, but also dilute the capacity they have to derail an industry or a state altogether. Why I say state? You read up on West Bengal, for instance. what the trade unions did to West Bengal, and all of them backed by communists. You read up on what happened to the Mumbai textile mills in the 1980s, and they never recovered from that. Sure, that led to a new real estate revolution. That's all fine. But they also never recovered, and a lot of people were displaced. A lot of people became unemployed, and that was the end of that story. So you also have to ensure that the trade unions have their rights, but they are not in the position to cripple an entire industry as they have done in the past. I mean, it's done. It's not impossible. That is the point to begin with. This is what political capital gets you. It gets you the license to go ahead with heavy reforms, and 2025 has been about that.
So, two, three things are important in this. Point number one, I again circle back to that one bit where companies see the average size of an MSME in India. Most probably, people don't know this because people have not really done any business in India. तो उनको idea नहीं होता. Most businesses in India will be having employees less than 200. Less than 200 log honge. In fact, what this does is actually will encourage people to formalize more people on their payrolls. What happens now is a lot of time, a lot of things are just outsourced and people don't like to scale up. Do you know how many companies in India could actually do a lot of things inside their own company and create better efficiencies, better quality control and a lot of things? But they don't. They're like, अरे मेरा वो roster है ना 50 के ऊपर चल जाएगा, मेरी लग जाएगी, मेरे को नहीं करना है, मैं किसी और को outsource कर दूंगा मेरा काम. We actively discourage quality manufacturing in India because of our stupid and archaic labor laws. So I'll give you an example. For example, समझ ले मैं एक textile yarn dyeing unit हूँ. I will give you textile examples. तो मेरी लेबर की स्ट्रेंथ यार्न डाइंग के लिए समझ ले अराउंड 60 to 70 होगी. मतलब मैं सिर्फ यार्न डाइंग कर रहा हूँ. मगर अगर मुझे यार्न डाइंग के साथ फैब्रिक डाइंग करनी है और अभी अगर मेरे को स्कोप अप टू 299 हो गया, तो मैं एक छोटी यूनिट जिसमें गारमेंट वॉशिंग, यार्न डाइंग एंड फैब्रिक डाइंग तीनों कर सकता हूँ. वर्कर्स का काइंड ऑफ ओवरलैप होगा. मेरे को 200 वर्कर नहीं, मेरा तो 150 वर्कर में काम हो जाएगा. और मैं एक वर्सेटाइल बिजनेस बन सकता हूँ. मेरे को इकोनॉमीज ऑफ स्केल मिल सकती है. मेरे फ्यूल एफिशिएंसी बढ़ सकती है. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, यू नो, आप एक 1 टन का लेस देन 1 टन का बॉयलर लगाओगे. मैं जैसे आपको बता रहा हूं, अगर आपने उसको 3 टन कर दिया तो आपकी वो जो इंक्रीज कैलोरीफिक वैल्यू होती है ना, अमाउंट ऑफ स्टीम जनरेटेड एंड कंज्यूम्ड इनसाइड द सिस्टम, उसके कॉस्ट गिरते रहते हैं. इसका मतलब एक्चुअली आप पोल्यूट भी कम कर रहे हो. आप एक्चुअली आप 3 1 टन के अलग बॉयलर लगाओ और एक 3 टन का बॉयलर लगाओ विद 70 to 80% एफिशिएंसी, आप एक्चुअली कम पोल्यूशन करते हो क्योंकि आपका वो जो कोल बर्न होता है हायर लेवल पे. तो एक्चुअली में दिस इज फैंटास्टिक. पीपल हैव नो आइडिया. एटलीस्ट टेक्सटाइल इंडस्ट्री में कितनी मदद करेगा डोमेस्टिक स्केल पे. इट इज अनबिलीवेबली गुड.
And they have factored in the textile industry, automobile sector to start with, because if we had to get on manufacturing, this is the areas we actually had to go with. Now, if we take one code one by one, if I start with the code on the wages 2019 code, right? It's more or less to do with the salaries. Okay. Now you're talking about a minimum salary which would be fixed by the states, which would be notified by the states in the next 6 months. They want to focus on the low wage workers here because there are several points. So I'll just try to go one by one. But the important part here is, which also impacts the white collar workers, the IT workers, is the uniform definition of wages. तो अभी क्या हो रहा था, मैंने अपने एक दोस्त को फोन किया, वो आईटी कंपनी में काम करता है. मैं कहा, तो एक बात बता, तो अपनी सैलरी स्लिप देख. उसको नहीं पता था लेबर लॉ या कुछ ऐसा हुआ है. He didn't even care, which is natural. No one cares about policy. तो मैंने उसको बोला कि तेरा सैलरी स्लिप में, एंड आई अर्ज एवरीवन टू डू दिस एक्सरसाइज, एक ब्रेकडाउन दिया होगा कि तेरा बेसिक सैलरी कितना है, तेरा डीए कितना है, then how much is the company putting your salary under HRA, how much of it is special allowance or other allowance. So beyond the basic and the DA and the retainership allowance, the government is telling you और कोई भी component हो, वो तुम्हारा CTC का 50% एक्सीड नहीं करना चाहिए. अभी क्या हो रहा है, बिकॉज द एम्प्लॉयर वांट्स टू सेव अप ऑन ग्रेच्युटी या पीएफ कंट्रीब्यूशंस, वो स्पेशल अलाउंस इतना बढ़ा देंगे, एचआरए इतना बढ़ा देंगे that becomes 60 to 70% of the salary, and the basic and the DA ends up only being 25 to 30% of the salary.
तो
And
इसका क्या
mind you, this
बोलेगा?
happens.
किसी ने लिखा है टेक होम सीटीसी विल रिड्यूस दोज हु टेक होम लोन्स एंड डेट विल फेस हीट. इसका क्या जवाब है?
No, I don't think that is the case. If you're saying that, because that is the point I'm addressing. If you're saying that the PF and the gratuity will now have to be factored in when all those excluded components like your special allowances, your HRA will be now less than 50%. Earlier it was 70%. So of course, people would think that the employer will contribute more, so your taken might be impacted to some extent. But you have to look at the larger picture for people who are sort of in the 6 to 12 lakh kind of a bracket. जो भी घर नहीं खरीद रहे. His question is not wrong, but the government is looking at the majority. That the employers cannot sort of play around with the young employees by just making everything about special allowances and not taking responsibility when it comes to their contributions, gratuity, provident fund, medical allowance, things like that. So that is where the government has made one major change. It might impact take home salary for some brackets, but that's also not clear as to that will be how big a minority. It won't be a significant minority for sure, but it will be a minority, that's for sure. Baki bonus ka hai, timely payment hai. See, again, deductions have been capped, no gender discrimination, mandatory written appointment letter, how the inspector comes in, how he'll inspect, kya system rahega, fines ka ye wo, sab theek hai. But if you've run a business, a lot of what has been introduced in the code wages 2019 part has to do with how the execution on the ground happens. Now you are talking about a minimum wage. That's great. The center is doing its job. कि मैंने तो अपना काम कर दिया भाई, मैं तो कह रहा हूँ एक minimum wage होनी चाहिए. अब इंडिया में प्रॉब्लम ये है लेबर का कि आई एम एन एम्प्लॉयर, यू आर एन एम्प्लॉय, आई टेल यू that I need to hire you. You'll say this is the minimum wage prescribed by the state, which again is very doable. How the market works, minimum wage उसमें cover हो जाता है more or less. But कोई backward state में, कोई economically backward state में, someone will be like, no, I don't want to pay that minimum wage. So that is where it will depend MSME to MSME. What if both the employer and the employer like, screw the minimum wage, just give me work and I'm happy with it. So that is the kind of exploitation that needs to stop, and that can only, sort of be understood once the execution on the ground happens. अब सरकार कह रही है तुम्हारे पास अगर कोई भी इंस्पेक्टर आ रहा है, जैसे टेक्सटाइल के लिए आता है, ऑटोमोबाइल के लिए आता है, किसी भी तरह का इंस्पेक्शन है, हम नहीं चाहते वो तुम्हें आते ही फाइन करे. हम उसको कह रहे हैं कि भाई तू 14 दिन ले, टेल देम, सजेस्ट देम व्हाट आर द रेमेडीज, व्हाट नीड्स टू बी फिक्स्ड, लेट देम फिक्स इट, एंड देन यू कम बैक एंड से इफ दे नीड टू बी फाइंड और नॉट. But again, we thought that with the GST also. But the GST inspectors, you hear a lot of things about them. The finance ministry also has been told a lot of things about them on Twitter itself. So that also is a part of the execution on the ground. Appointment letter, sure. I mean, a lot of gig workers might benefit from it. A lot of people who are in the low range might benefit from it. But again, people who are on a salary of 20 to 22 grand, this is labor basically. This is labor that comes from states like Bihar, UP, even West Bengal. They are just looking for another $1,000 and they'll change jobs. Appointment letter from them is not something that they tie their future to. It's not something I will perceive as an appointment letter as. मेरे लिए appointment letter होगा, ठीक है, मुझे शायद अगली job में दिखाना है. It's a valid proof that I was working here, blah blah blah. उसको इतना परवाह नहीं है. ठीक है, government wants to have a record or something, but it's just one of those things that will be lost in execution. Is that my fear is. But the one thing good in this is how they're telling the companies, don't sort of play around with the salaries. Do not play around with the components where you sort of hype the special allowance, HRA, all that nonsense. Keep the basic and DA at least 50% of the CTC. That's essentially what Code Wages Bill is all about. But a lot will depend on how it's implemented on the ground. A lot will depend on how the state governments go about prescribing that minimum wage. Because when we think minimum wage, we start thinking America. कि वहाँ $18 या $20 जो भी per hour की minimum wage होती है, and then there are unions negotiating that minimum wage. Will we have that type of politics in India? I don't think so. Because even today there's a surplus of labor. Maybe 20 years from now, this all will make a lot of sense when we start to age as a country, when we reach a per capita where we don't have labor surplus. Remember, that is going to be a problem in the future, which we'll talk about some other day. But for now, it's all about execution. There will be MSMEs who will be in a position to meet this. but I don't know how many MSMEs will actually honestly follow it. That is where the government will have to sort of create a mechanism where anyone who complains about a grievance, that grievance should be addressed.
Yeah, but okay, so somebody has come back and asked, do you think the government has done this after the recent state? अरे यार 3 साल से डिस्कशन चल रही है यार, कभी तो मतलब यार न्यूज भी फॉलो कर लिया करो. मेरे को मालूम है नंबर 1 नंबर पेज के बाद आप लोग ज्यादातर पढ़ते नहीं हो, मगर अगर आप इसको सीरियसली फॉलो कर रहे होते थे तो आपको पता होता था पीआईबी और ये सब में ये कंटिन्यूअसली डिस्कशन चालू था यार. हर चीज में एंगल क्यों ढूंढते हैं लोग? कोई मतलब
बट एक
इसमें कोई
चीज है
एंगल ही
यार,
नहीं है यार. वो इट जस्ट हैपन टू हैपन नाउ. सारी स्टेट्स
नहीं,
इन्वॉल्व थी यार इसमें.
स्टेट्स इन्वॉल्व हैं, बट ऑन अ डिफरेंट नोट, आप फार्म लॉज की बात करें. आज किसने लिखा हुआ था एक्स पे कि तुम लेबर लॉज ले आए, तुम फार्म लॉज नहीं ला पाए. भाई, these labor codes were already sort of accepted and executed by the state governments. Just that now they are nationally there. It's a uniform set of
They are
codes.
all formalized under a rubric now. And how it
हाँ,
happened is, if we were to explain it in a simplistic way, भाई पहले बीजेपी फ्रेंडली स्टेट्स पहले वो कर रही थी. फिर जब आप एक प्रूफ ऑफ जिसको बोलते हैं ना वर्किंग दिखा देते हो कि भाई ऐसे हो सकता है, उसके बाद धीरे 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 हमने नेशनल कर दिया और कन्विंस कर दिया स्टेट्स को कोई आपका ही फायदा है, कोई नुकसान नहीं है.
पर ये जो क्वेश्चन आया था ना इससे पहले, दैट विल माय टेक होम सीटीसी बी इम्पैक्टेड, ये है तो देखो लेजिट क्वेश्चन, बट अगेन वो भी एग्जीक्यूशन पे है. हाउ मेनी पीपल विल एक्चुअली गेट इम्पैक्टेड? क्योंकि तुम्हारी
नहीं, ये भी
मेजॉरिटी
क्वेश्चन है कि इट इज नॉट अ लीगल, पता नहीं क्या टीम है कि टर्म है, मेरे को नहीं मालूम है. आई थिंक ये टीम नहीं हो
टर्म
सकता,
टर्म आई थिंक ही मींस.
टर्म होएगा. एंड इट हैज नॉट बीन डिफाइंड बाय एनी लेबर कोड्स. डज दिस न्यू रिफॉर्म फिक्स द इशू?
It goes only as far as if fixing it that basic plus DA cannot be less than 50%. That is as far as that goes, because cost to company, each company defines its CTC in a very different way. My company, for instance, will say I'm not putting the medical allowance there. I can't challenge it now. That's my company's rule. So these things are different. But ये problem जो कह रहे हैं, जो होम लोन वाला चीज बोला, वो आएगा. बट वो कितना पॉपुलेशन है, कितने लोग हैं, वो अलग चीज है. बट अगेन इट्स ऑल अबाउट एग्जीक्यूशन. दिस पार्ट, मिनिमम वेज, ये वो मुझे नहीं लगता that it will be that simple to execute in states like, say, with high industry density. That's where my worry is, because
और किसी
MSMEs
ने
are not honest.
और किसी ने पूछा क्या ये ट्रम्प के पागलपन की वजह से हुआ है? नहीं भैया, ये 3 साल
नहीं
से
नहीं,
चल रहा था. इट्स जस्ट अ कोइंसिडेंस. दिस रिफॉर्म हैज नथिंग टू डू विद ट्रम्प. जीएसटी रेट कट हैज एवरीथिंग टू डू विद ट्रम्प. सीधा बात बोल रहा हूं. जीएसटी वाला ट्रम्प चाचा को थैंक यू बोल देना टैरिफ की पागलपन का. इसका कोई लेना देना नहीं था. ये बहुत टाइम से चल रहा था. और ये तो कुछ नहीं है. म्युनिसिपल रिफॉर्म, मेरे को अगर पूछो, आज न्यूज में लेबर रिफॉर्म है, मगर जो म्युनिसिपल रिफॉर्म्स गवर्नमेंट प्रपोज करी है, और उसको हम बाद में करेंगे क्योंकि उसको भी डिटेल में करना पड़ेगा. कि भैया एक तो दुख की बात यह है कि मुझे लगता है एक हम ही 2 चमन चूतिए हैं जो इन चीजों के बारे में बातें करते हैं. पूरे देश को ही पड़ी नहीं हुई है. हम ही वाहियात लोग हैं, पता नहीं क्या है, कोई बात ही नहीं करता इनके बारे में.
नहीं, ये नहीं किसी को पड़ी, because people, again, the BJP also doesn't do a great job in telling how important these reforms are. I think only the prime minister tweeted about it, and I think Mansukh Mandaviya ji tweeted about it. That's about it. Or home minister might have tweeted about it, but वो कार्यकर्ता, real spokespersons, ये सब नहीं करते, which is wrong. But again, the most important code with respect to an employer is the Industrial Relations Code of 2020. This is where it starts getting very, very important. And the main provisions I'll take up, the threshold required for the government permission for mass layoffs, पहले 100 लोग था, अब 300 कर दिया. ठीक है? And that is very, very important, because what was happening was that companies were saying, look, we are not going to hire more than 100 people or more than a certain number of people, because when it comes to firing them, and layoffs happen, mass layoffs happen, you don't know what a personal, what a individual is going through while running an MSME. Business is shut every day. Sometimes it's not the external factor, sometimes it's just bad business decisions. And you going to a government for permission because of mass layoffs and then being hijacked by the trade unions, I think that was something that was worrying a lot of people. And this provision does away with it. It simply says up to 300 people, if you're hiring 300 workers, and it applies to factories, mines, plantations also. You do not need government's permission for mass layoffs, for retrenchment. Now, employers in large firms, especially in the textile and the auto sector, they are in a position to benefit from this. But the workers are saying कि भाई तुम हमारी लंका लगा रहे हो. पहले गवर्नमेंट परमिशन लगती थी, अब मास ले-ऑफ्स हो सकता है, गवर्नमेंट won't be involved. But here's the thing. Here's what the companies are saying. And Kushal can probably chip in as a previous entrepreneur himself, as a former entrepreneur himself. They are saying we are anyway not hiring because of the आके clause previously. कि हमें लगता था कि परमिशन लेनी पड़ेगी, हम फंसेंगे, ट्रेड यूनियंस will screw us over. We were anyway afraid of hiring. Now at least we are in a position where we can hire, where we can have a mechanism where capitalism wins. If things are going good, they are going good, and we'll want to ensure they are going good. But if they are going bad, they will go bad, and then it doesn't become a political issue. How do you look at it? I think it's a fair thing because capitalism works like that. We hate it or we like it, capitalism works just like that.
Point number one, bhai, I think most people have not done rounds in an average industrial area. क्या होता है हाल में इंटरनेट पे बहुत सारे लोग टेक कंपनीज में काम करते हैं. आई एम नॉट पुटिंग देम डाउन, आई लाइक टेक, बट क्या उनकी है ना एक बड़ी ऑर्गेनाइज सी वे ऑफ थिंकिंग होती है. उन्होंने ना कभी एक मैन्युफैक्चरिंग यूनिट नहीं देखी, एक छोटी यूनिट इंजीनियरिंग की जिसमें लेथ मशीन होगी, 5-7 लोग काम करते हैं, एक आदमी उठाता है ऐसे रोल डालता है उधर से उधर, फिर उधर से एक जोरदार गाली आती है जल्दी कर. उन्होंने कभी ये देखा नहीं है. या कोई टेक्सटाइल की यूनिट या वीविंग यूनिट या मतलब बेसिकली जो रियल हार्डकोर काइंड ऑफ मैन्युफैक्चरिंग इंडिया में होती क्यों नहीं है. एक वर्कर नहीं मिलते. यू डोंट इवन फाइंड वर्कर्स इन इंडिया. ओके, यू गो अराउंड महाराष्ट्र इंडस्ट्रियल डेवलपमेंट कॉर्पोरेशन, गुजरात इंडस्ट्रियल डेवलपमेंट कॉर्पोरेशन, भले आप यू गो टू हरियाणा, यू गो एनीवेयर अक्रॉस द कंट्री, द वन बोर्ड इन डिफरेंट रीजनल लैंग्वेजेस along with English that you see cutting across the country is workers needed. It is a standard demand cutting across the country. In Maharashtra, they will be like helper paije, worker paije, kind of in Marathi. And boss, manufacturing is tough. There are two-pronged reasons. एक तो worker वैसे ही नहीं मिलते, कम मिलते हैं. And manufacturers are now paying more and more. In fact, I tell so many young kids that if you really want to get into making more money, look at manufacturing as a genuine option, not tech. Look at manufacturing, you will have more job stability and you will actually rise if you are highly skilled. तुमको लगेगा क्या है मैं घटिया काम कर रहा हूँ छोटी स्टेज पे, बट इफ यू आर हाईली स्किल्ड, वो सेट है ना छोटी यूनिट का, वो तुमको बहुत जल्दी ऊपर पहुंचा देगा अगर तुम स्किल्ड हो. और तुम इतना सीखोगे जो तुम कभी कोई ऐसे व्हाइट कॉलर जॉब में नहीं सीखे अपनी लाइफ में. ये मेरी बात मेरे पल्ले बांध लेना. मैं अपनी खुद की फैक्ट्री में भी जमीन पे बैठ के काम कर चुका हूँ, इसीलिए मैं बोल रहा हूँ मैं सबसे ज्यादा मेरी लाइफ में सीखा मेरे फैक्ट्री के फ्लोर पे, और किधर नहीं सीखा मैं. और वो भी मेरे वर्करों के साथ बैठ के मशीन चला के, मशीन भी चलाना आता था. बट ये एक साइड है. दूसरा साइड क्या है, जब ऐसे घटिया वाहियात लॉज होते हैं ना, तो मेरे जैसा जो ओनर होता था वो वैसे ही नहीं बढ़ाता था अपना बिजनेस, क्योंकि मैं बोलता था मैं अपने पैर पे कुल्हाड़ी क्यों मारूं. सो दिस इज अ विन विन. इसमें कोई वर्कर राइट्स के ऊपर हनन नहीं होने वाला है. भाई साहब आप थोड़े रियलिस्टिक बनो. यहां पे अगर आप ये नहीं करोगे तो ये एक तरफ बोलते हो इंडिया में मैन्युफैक्चरिंग नहीं आती, दूसरी तरफ अगर मैन्युफैक्चरिंग लाने के लिए जो करना है वो नहीं करते. यार दोनों तो नहीं हो सकता ना. तुम यू कैनॉट हैव अ केरला मॉडल फॉर इंडिया. आई एम सॉरी टू से, देयर इज अ रीजन व्हाई केरला हैज नो इंडस्ट्री. देयर इज अ रीजन व्हाई बंगाल हैज नो इंडस्ट्री. वर्कर्स ऑफ द वर्ल्ड unite is not the solution. It doesn't mean you become a blood-sucking vampire and you suck the blood of innocent workers. No, but it means it has to be a complementary system with checks and balances. And what the government is proposing over here is good. अब मैं तो टेक्सटाइल से निकल गया, पहले आता ना तो बहुत अच्छा होता था.
यार देखो, इंडिया में बिजनेस करना आसान नहीं है. आई थिंक दिस इज नो सीक्रेट. पीपल हु हैव डन इट, पीपल हु स्टडी the way of doing business, they all will vouch for it. But labor is a challenge. What exaggerates this challenge is the trade unions. This is the most contentious part of this entire four courts. If any protest happens, I don't think it will happen, but if any happens, or if some loony left union calls for a protest, it will be only because now the government is saying you want to negotiate, form a trade union which has the support of over 50% of the employees, 51% of the employees. अभी क्या चलता था कि एक बैंक है, जैसे पब्लिक सेक्टर बैंक है, मर्जर की सिर्फ बात हो रही है, ये होता था. I mean, I have seen people put up on WhatsApp statuses. The finance minister randomly comments somewhere that we have to look at mergers for the next 20 years, something she says. Suddenly 10 different unions will come up and announce strikes, and bank strikes happen in public sector banks. You all know that. Now the government is saying, look, if you want to negotiate, have one trade union with over 51% of the support. Unless we are not, unless that happens, we are not negotiating. It's very good. You have manufacturers who want to really scale up operations. Pehle they were worried about the part where they had to go to the government for layoff permissions, or it becoming a trade union issue. Now the government is saying, look, we are trusting you to run your business as you wish to, hire as many people as you wish to, upskill if you wish to. But when it comes to trade unions, we're also empowering the employer, not the employee. Because a lot of us do not know, it's no longer popular in the literature we consume every day on X or in the news. India has been hit by trade union strikes. We were a textile. I mean, the city Kushal comes from used to be a textile hub. The state of West Bengal used to be a textile hub, one of the largest in the world. What happened? The left loonies took over. They all took over. And it's not just textiles, I mean, it's across industries. These trade unions in Bengal, for instance, I think they tell that Dunlop story very, very often. That how it was a British-owned company, then it was taken over by an Indian brand, had over 7,000 workers. I have it in my notes here. And across the 80s, all that happened was strikes. And strikes of the extent कि तुमने वहां के लोगों को लॉकअप कर लिया, एम्प्लॉयर को बंद कर लिया. क्या डिमांड है तुम्हारी? वेजेस 400% बढ़ा दो. अगर 100 रुपए वेज है तो 400 रुपए कर दो, 500 रुपए कर दो. I mean, think about this. If you are being paid 10,000 rupees, for example, a month, can you even sit on a strike and say, I want 50,000 as my next month's salary? It can't work that way, right? The company has its own cash supply, cash flows. Doesn't work that way. But that is what was happening across the 80s in West Bengal. And Dunlop's story is very, very famous. I think everyone should look it up. How the people, the left government was actually enabling all these strikes. And there were around 72 illegal strikes in 12 months. So every week there was a strike happening. The plant manager used to be gheraued in some cases for days. Machinery worth crores and crores was stolen. And this is the legacy which we have sort of created for our business groups. So today, when people say why everything happened to China, why it did not happen to us? Because the world was also looking at us in the 80s and the 90s and seeing what we were doing with the industry we had. We were going completely bonkers left. So that stops now. Number two, the new code also says that now you have to give a 14-day notice for a strike. Now, the ones who want to go on a strike, they will go anyway on a strike. But this sort of makes it very difficult to have those instantaneous strikes, which earlier used to happen. वो भी एक चीज है. There has to be a 14-day notice, up from 6 weeks in some cases. So that's a different law now. And strikes would be considered illegal without any failure of conciliation. They will get the 54 wages for 14 days if the strike is called off. So anyway, the government again is favoring the employer here. So the most contentious part of these four codes, and this is what you'll hear from the likes of Yogendra Yadav also in his sweet, meeky voice, that, oh, the industry is not now
किसका नाम ले
favoring
लिया
the
तूने?
slow wage workers.
मुंह कौड़ा कर दिया तूने मेरा.
क्या? I heard something. I thought you said Koda. Okay. So this is the
घटिया
most
वाहियात
contentious.
इंसान है, सबसे इरिटेटिंग आदमी है वो.
हाँ, अभी कोई कह रहा था कांग्रेस ने उसको पिंक स्लिप दिया, बट अगेन कमिंग बैक टू द कोड, उसके अलावा नोटिस फॉर स्ट्राइक, उससे अलावा कुछ नहीं है. देयर इज द फिक्स्ड टर्म एम्प्लॉयमेंट कॉन्ट्रैक्ट्स दैट आर बीइंग नाउ एक्सपैंडेड टू even the temporary workers. The worker definition has been expanded to include contract laborers. So that is where also the gig economy comes into play. Penalties have been simplified. So more or less, this is about empowering the smaller MSMEs. Remember, our MSMEs faced from two problems, and one I'm still waiting to be addressed in the way it will be addressed. Nirmala ji, in her budget speech, I think it was last year, she said last year, as in 2024 के elections के बाद जो budget हुआ था, कि we will have the banks designing a special way how to give credit access to MSMEs. Because the way banks deal with MSMEs right now, with the kind of paperwork they want, the kind of things they want, mortgage and stuff like that, that's a bit unfair to the MSMEs, right? And that is why MSMEs prefer taking money from the market as a loan. वो आपस में ही भाड़े पे ब्याज पे एक दूसरे को लेंड करते हैं. So one thing she made a very good point about was that we want the banks to lend more to the MSMEs. It helps formalization and things like that. That part really hasn't worked out yet. I'm sure it's still being worked on. The second problem was the labor. Now, ask anyone, Kushal can probably watch for it, anyone even employing 20 people in a small manufacturing unit. It's not a simple job. I mean, a kindergarten teacher has better shot at controlling 20 kids who are just all over the place, but an entrepreneur will have a harder time controlling 20 labors, because some days they are just missing because someone has offered them 500 or more rupees for a month. Some days someone is missing because they just don't want to work. Someday there are so many festivals. Some just go back home into the villages and disappear, never to come back again after months and months of training. So being an entrepreneur is difficult. And then the government tells you, you can't lay them off. You cannot do that. That is where it becomes a headache. So this part of the code, it eases it out. It dilutes the power of the trade unions while retaining the rights of the workers. And at the same time, it further empowers MSME along with everything that is being done.
Another very important thing that most people are not willing to consider, how much it means for a businessman, and it helps the person that is being employed by the businessman to work in that company, is the decriminalization of 65 sections after these labor codes come in. Because those 65 sections had thousands of compliances that were used consistently by the bureaucrat class, especially at the state and municipal level. Because remember, labor is very much a state issue. More than a central issue, it is a state issue. And all the state governments that used to use these laws, and wo jo ek latakti talwar hoti thi that would lead to jabardast corruption, is now going to reduce. यार आपको खुशी नहीं होती है, मतलब करप्शन कम होने वाली है इस देश में? These things, for the record, should have been done in 1950s, 60s. 2025 में हो रहा है ये. फिर लोग बोलते हैं, हाय चाइना में सारी मैन्युफैक्चरिंग क्यों चली गई? लोग बोलते हैं, हाय जापान में सारी मैन्युफैक्चरिंग क्यों चली गई? ओ भाई, इसके लिए गई, वो लोग का फंक्शनिंग ब्रेन था. उन्होंने रियलाइज किया हमको इंडस्ट्रियलाइज करना है तो हमको ये लॉज बनाने पड़ेंगे. Tushar said something very important in the beginning. He said we have Sweden-like laws in a piss-poor country.
With China-like ambitions.
We are the epitome. Yeah, we are the epitome of बड़ी-बड़ी बातें, वड़ा पाव खाते.
Yeah.
मतलब क्या हो रहा है भाई? We pretend to be what? We want Sweden-level facilities in a country like India. भाई, get real. कभी अपने घर के बाहर जाके देखा है? एक्चुअली घर के बाहर के निकलोगे करते रहोगे, नहीं तो घर के अंदर भी खांसते रहते हो अगर एयर प्यूरिफायर नहीं है तो.
Now, this is one part I want you to sort of put your perspective to, because you live in two different continents, two different hemispheres. Okay. People do not understand that the way logistics works in India, that the way their Amazons and their Flipkarts and their Zomatos and Swiggies, the way they work in India, with the kind of efficiency they work in India, driven by the kind of surplus labor we have, willing to deliver orders for as little as 25 rupees per order, that is not something that happens in the West. So, before we come to the next code, the third code, which is the part where the gig workers actually win big, please sort of tell, for the education of the viewers at large, how difference is, if I look at from a perspective from an Amazon order, how is it in Canada versus how it is in India? Because you also tweeted about it a few days back.
भाई, इट इज वेरी, देखो तुम अपने आप को अपनी लाइफ में कभी टॉर्चर करना ना, तो उबर ईट्स कभी कनाडा में ऑर्डर करना, तुम्हें पता चलेगा कि तुमको कितनी फास्ट डिलीवरी की. हाउ मच इंडिया स्पॉइल्स यू, दिस गिग इकोनॉमी. यू हैव नो आइडिया. यू लिव आउटसाइड इंडिया टू रियलाइज how much the gig economy spoils you in India. एवरीथिंग इज सो स्लो। अच्छा, और अपने आप को अगर परम टॉर्चर करना है ना, तो कभी गलती से मेरी बात मानो, आई थिंक एवरीवन शुड गो थ्रू दिस, दे शुड मेक अ कॉल सेंटर कॉल टू सम कंपनी इन द वेस्ट, it doesn't matter who is on the call, Indian, Filipino, white person, they will make you go through, like you know मैं पहले पहले हंसता था, मुझे लगता था मेरा भाई फेंकता है, मगर मेरा भाई बोलता था जब भी मुझे कॉल सेंटर में कॉल करना होता है ना, मैं 3 घंटे का स्पेयर टाइम लग के कॉल करता हूँ। मतलब मेरा मेरे को लगता है ना मेरा भाई फेंक रहा है, फिर मैं उधर गया, मैं भी अभी 2 घंटे स्पेयर रख के फिर ही काम करता हूँ। अगर मुझे कॉल करनी है 2 घंटा, प्रेस दिस बटन, प्रेस दैट, ये करिए, फिर वो आएगा, फिर वो बोलेगा ये डिस्क्लेमर पूरा प्ले करेंगे, अगर तुम इंश्योरेंस रिलेटेड कॉल कर रहे हो, फिर तुम ऐसे है ना बहन के टके के जैसे बैठे रहोगे, हाँ हाँ बोल, अच्छा तुम कुछ सुन तो रहे नहीं हो, तुम्हारी अटेंशन तो है नहीं उसमें, फिर तुम लास्ट में यस झक मारा के बोलने वाले। वो इतना टॉर्चर करते हैं ना तुमको, ये ओवरऑल जो एक वहां का सिस्टम है ना, क्योंकि एवरीथिंग इज टाइड इन लीगलीज इन द वेस्ट, राइट, एवरीथिंग इज लीगलीज, and then they have just created these things around legalese. It is so frustrating. in India में क्या अपने को फास्ट फास्ट चाहिए भाई, कफ ड्रॉप्स चाहिए, 10 मिनट में आना चाहिए, and it spoils you. And
We are
one more thing,
entitled.
yeah, अरे नहीं
Now
आया
we
तो
are
लोग गाली देते
entitled.
हैं, ये तो लेट क्यों आया?
I tell you, I remember few years back when I was in Swarajya, I remember I had written an article which said you Zomato then had promised a 10-minute food delivery. And I was like, किसको चाहिए भाई, नहीं जल्दी थी, तुम्हें को गरम गरम खाना आराम से 20-25 मिनट में लाकर दे। फिर एक था कि there is a 10-minute delivery promise for groceries. And I was like, who the fuck needs it? But then that was 4-5 years ago, okay? And even Jaggi had written a piece then. Today, if I make an order on Blinkit, okay, I get it literally in 5 minutes because the dark store is located for 500 meters from where I live. Now, this is the new reality of NCR. This is the new reality, I'm pretty sure, in Mumbai too, and several other metros. Bengaluru obviously works completely on these gig workers. But what protection do these gig workers really have? Not
No,
much.
but before that, I also wanted to show this chart, which was shared by a Twitter user. This is very
हाँ
interesting. So very good यार, ये तो बढ़िया चीज है। पहले 5
हाँ,
साल का
this
वो कट
also
ऑफ
is a
होता था
part.
ना
हाँ हाँ, अब 1 साल का हो गया।
यार, ये किस हिसाब से प्रो वर्कर नहीं है ये रिफॉर्म? ये तो प्रो वर्कर ही है ना रिफॉर्म। आप इधर से उधर भी जा सकते हो। सी व्हाट दिस डज इज दैट इवन इफ यू मूव फ्रॉम कंपनी ए टू कंपनी बी, यू गेट द फ्लेक्सिबिलिटी ऑफ हैविंग द बेनिफिट्स while changing jobs. You don't need to be stuck for 5 years. At the same time, this is the pro worker side, and the pro company side is कि भाई अगर आप useless हो तो कंपनी आपको less than 300 एम्प्लॉइज है तो आपको निकाल भी सकती है।
सही है ना, ग्रेचुटी का तो सही है। पीपल, अब प्रॉब्लम ये है, मेरे को लगता है कुछ व्हाइट कॉलर लोग क्या करेंगे ना, हर 2 साल में ग्रेचुटी निकाल के आईफोन खरीदेंगे। तो आई डोंट नो हाउ दे विल गो अबाउट
तो लोग वियर्ड है,
इट।
लोग वियर्ड है, उसका कोई इलाज नहीं है। मगर यार
हाँ,
दिस इज लाइक एवरी लॉ इज नॉट गोइंग टू बी परफेक्ट, दैट आई एम
नो
विलिंग टू
नो
कंसीड। It's not
नो,
perfect, but boss, this is like मनीष सबरवाल का न्यू इंडियन एक्सप्रेस में एक अच्छा ऑपेड आया है, वो पढ़ो। इट्स नॉट परफेक्ट दिस, बट दिस इज अ जाइगेंट। भाई अरविंद पनगरिया जैसा सीनियर इकोनॉमिस्ट अगर किसी चीज की प्रशंसा कर रहा है ना, एक तो वो सर के मुंह से किसी की तारीफ करना भी बड़ी मुश्किल होती है, अगर वो कर रहे हैं तो जाके सीरियसली लो। अरविंद पनगरिया उसकी तारीफ कर रहे हैं इस चीज की।